SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
Discover Covington County Hospital's swing bed program, offering comprehensive care for patients transitioning from acute hospital care to home. With a focus on rehabilitation, we ensure a smooth journey back to your home environment. Choose Covington County Hospital, where your health care matters.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Top of the morning to you there, Rhino.
Howdy.
I see you've got your St. Patty's Day green on. So do I. Those that are watching, I do have a sweater atop it because it's freaking cold out there still. And last night, I traveled up to your hometown of Tupelo, and dang, it was cold. That wind was whipping around, and distinctively colder up there than it is here, just a short 3 hours north. You're familiar with that situation. And the other thing you can tell traveling north, as we did yesterday afternoon, is that the trees aren't quite as green as you travel north. They're a few days behind, just that little bit of distance north of us, right? But it is St. Patty's Day. People around the world celebrating with shamrocks, parades, stories of pots of gold at the end of the rainbow, leprechauns. But, it's also a good green day up on the markets. Gotta like that, huh? The Dow, it's been up as much as 400 points this morning, up presently around 190, 200 points. Feels like investors getting a little better feeling about the situation in Iran. The NASDAQ, the S&P also in the green today. Crude oil still trending upward up to about $94 and change a barrel. That's still uncomfortably high. As the price of gas, you guys have seen it, it's up. And it's going to remain elevated, I'm afraid, for a while, until we get some breakthrough in the situation in Iran. As you know, the president says we're not prepared to come to the table to discuss a serious ceasefire until we are 100% assured that this regime, whoever the hell's in charge over there, ends its nuclear ambitions. That's the whole purpose of this deal, is to push Iran back to a point where you're decades, if ever, away from producing a nuclear warhead. That's unacceptable. And you know why? Because these people are nuts. And they don't value human life, in my view. And so it's perfectly acceptable for them, right, to use nuclear weapons to achieve their end goals, whatever radical crazy they are. It's just kind of a sad deal that so much time and money and effort is being expended in this effort just because you got bad people. Just act right. We wouldn't have to do this, kind of the way I look at it. Now, there is some news out of the Trump administration today. A key resignation came about. The chief, the National Counterterrorism Center Director, Joe Kent. He has resigned saying, I just don't support this war, and I'm out of here. So honestly, I'd rather him step out of the way if he's not on board. Fact is, the commander-in-chief is in charge. We elected him. Like it or not, we conferred that power to him. You may disagree. That's fine. But if you do, get out of the way. Don't stay around in the administration. You just muck up the works. So I do respect him for at least acknowledging that reality and stepping aside. He's an Army veteran, two-time Republican congressional candidate. He put his resignation out there on X, a letter, says, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. After much reflection, I have decided to resign from my position as director of the National Counterterrorism effective today, Terrorism Center, effective today. So in the meantime, Israel, they say they got their man, for what that's worth, whoever the man is in charge of Iran. Security Chief Larijani is killed. They reported that within the last 24 hours. Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Tuesday, late Tuesday, that Iran's security chief has been killed in an Israeli airstrike. No confirmation of this from Iran. He's largely thought to be the person running the country, we've learned. I didn't know that. Who knows, right? It's almost like they play shell games intentionally, so you don't know. It feels like, because it's not a well-organized, structured entity is the nation. It's just crazy. But this guy's out of the way, and Israel seems to be feeling pretty good about that. The president continues to deliver the message that their military has been completely obliterated and have no capability. You saw that, Rhino. He talked further about the attacks on the island of Karg, and he basically said, not only have we eliminated all the military installations on Iran's Karg Island, left in place its oil infrastructure, but eliminated all the production facilities where Iran's military assets are manufactured, much of them. I didn't realize this is an 8-square-mile island, 16 miles from the Gulf Coast of Iran, the Persian Gulf Coast. 90% of the oil the country exports is pumped from terminals into super tankers, up to 10 at a time. That's just a few hundred miles north of the Hormuz Strait. That's really the center of their economic jewel, if you will. So the president kept all that intact because that affects the global supply of oil. He gets that. We want them to produce oil and put it on the global market, and to end this practice of subverting the global market and selling directly to China and other parts of Asia at a discounted price. And you know they're getting something in exchange for that. Although I think they're realizing, are they not, Rhino, that if it's protection and defense from China they're supposed to be, or intelligence they're supposed to be receiving, maybe even advice from China's military, it ain't working very well. So the president leaves that oil infrastructure intact, but takes out all of their military assets and their military production capability. The nation's crown jewel, Karg Island. But the security chief of Iran, according to reports from the nation of Israel, is gone, is out. Meanwhile, I'll say this with tongue-in-cheek, our buddy the race lady, that's what we named her here on this program, that would be Joy Reid, former star anchor of Morning Joy over there on MS. It's MS Now, right, correct? They changed the name, no longer MSNBC. Or is it?
So.
I think that's right. So she, of course, appearing on a podcast yesterday, never missing out on the opportunity to condemn this country. And she says that, well, you know, people in America are just marginally better than people in Iran, even under the regime's oppression and suppression. Just marginally better. And she goes on to talk about abortion. She references that. You know, like, well, you can't do that here, but you can over there. We're just a little better in the availability of abortion. She's a loon. Now,
I'm fairly certain we don't have any morality police patrolling the streets of America to beat you if your hair is showing.
Exactly. And to your point there, I saw a report, you may have seen this, where a female in Iran was brutally punished, I think like even some physical punishment, just because she showed a little too much of her wrist. She's saying that's their practice, right? You got to have all that covered. Oh, but they're just marginally better. Pretty sure people, American women, are able to show their hair, which you can't do over there, and their wrist and even their hands, believe it or not, and their legs. We're coming right back in the Element Well studio. Gordon Fellows with the Bankers Association at 10:35.
Hey, this is Bob, and if you're like me, you like dealing with local people. Majestic Metals was founded in Mississippi in 1954 and are headquartered right in Gluckstadt. For complete metal building systems and steel roofing and siding, call the hometown folks. Majestic Metals, 800-647-8540 or online at majesticmetalsinc.com.
Every day, companies are choosing to grow in Mississippi. More investments, more jobs, better opportunities for people to stay in Mississippi. The Skills Foundation is working to promote these opportunities through the Skills That Pay campaign. We're connecting the next generation of workers with high-paying jobs that don't require a four-year degree. We've given out thousands of dollars in awards to graduating students. This year, we're giving away even more. We're helping students take their first step toward a great career and economic independence, supporting young Mississippians going into manufacturing, energy, and more. Because we know when we invest in our people, the whole state benefits. To learn more or get involved, visit skillsthatpay.ms. And remember, if you want a good-paying job, you need Skills That Pay.
Paid for by the Skills Foundation of Mississippi.
Hey, can you blow up some...
Saturday morning from 10 until noon for the Handyman Show. Brought to you locally in part by Mid-South Crawl Space Solutions. Protecting your home from structural damage, cracks, humidity, mold, and more. That's Mid-South Crawl Space Solutions of Mississippi.
Hi, this is Mark Shapley. Looking for the perfect night out? Step into timeless elegance at Shapley's Restaurant in Richland, where prime steaks, fresh Gulf seafood, and world-class wine come together in a warm, upscale atmosphere. Whether it's a date night, business dinner, or a celebration, Shapley's delivers unforgettable Southern hospitality and flavor. Shapley's Restaurant, Jackson's premier dining restaurant for over 40 years. Visit mmshapleys.com and reserve your table today. mmshapleys.com.
Hey, this is Bob. I'm here with Logan, ESI Supplies, the drilled mud headquarters. What do y'all got going on with that?
Man, we stock a couple different products of drilling mud, and Bayroyd's a big vendor for us, and we do mainly for vertical and horizontal drillers. So if you're a underground utility contractor that is looking for drill mud, this is the place to go.
Stop by and see them at 111 Aerosmith Drive in Richland or give them a call at 601-933-4910. That's 601-933-4910 or online at esisupply.net.
This is where the story of your state gets told each day. We're proud to cover the Magnolia State like nobody else. SuperTalk, Mississippi.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
We're rolling. Middays with Gerard Gibert. What? This is so awesome. On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Happy St. Patty's Day. Hope you have a lucky one today. The old luck of the Irish. Well, you know, a reflection on St. Patty's Day. I checked out the American Spectator. They published an essay that reflected on the saint's remarkable legacy. Said when the Roman Empire collapsed and much of Europe descended into chaos, turns out it was Irish monks and missionaries who thought enough to preserve the knowledge of the ancient world. It was the Irish who lovingly preserved, this is from the article, the flickering candle of Christianity when that of Rome was stamped out. Through careful scholarship, writing, and teaching, the, quote, sons of St. Patrick safeguarded the intellectual and spiritual traditions that would eventually help rebuild Western civilization. You know, civilization, and you can even extend that to freedom, the way we understand it, enjoy it, respect it in this country. It's not preserved by accident. It takes some effort and intent. Only individuals and institutions, of course, who choose to defend and stand in the gap and promote those ideas that matter are capable of preserving it. So, St. Patrick's Day, there's a little bit more to it than just Irish music and Irish traditions, but there is a historical context behind it as well. Here at home in the great state of Mississippi, no surprise, I'm sure you saw, Rhino, within the last hour, the old NIL bill got killed in the state Senate. Looks like it is out of here. So, and that, of course, is the bill that would have, came over from the House, would have exempted NIL income for these college athletes, would have exempted it from state income tax. But that did not make it. We knew that was going to happen. You remember we had Senator Sparks on a couple of weeks ago, and he was clearly a little upset about the goings-on down there in the Capitol where legislation was being transported in accordance with the Rhino processionary rules and guidelines, but it didn't seem to be making a difference. They were falling on deaf ears, shall we say, as they entered the opposite chambers where much legislation was quickly disposed of. And so here we are. We got this big bill that did pass the House that would have exempted NIL income from state income taxes, but the Senate was having nothing of it, and Senator Daniel Sparks told us that was going to be the case. So take that, House. Senator Dean Kirby, who sits on the Senate committee that took up the legislation, said, I don't know about the rest of you on this committee, but I've had several constituents that have called me that are not happy at all about this bill. So there you go. It looks like that measure is not going to survive. Here's an idea. Let's just get rid of the whole dang income tax for everybody like now. How about that? Then we don't have these special carve-outs for folks like college athletes. Already, remember, retirement income in the state of Mississippi is exempt from state income tax. Many Mississippians benefit from that because we got a bunch of retired folks here. It's tax-friendly to retired people. Let's make it tax-friendly to working people. Yes, I know we have legislation that will eventually, ostensibly, eliminate the state income tax, but we got a painful 14 years to wait before that becomes a reality. We are chipping away at it year after year in accordance with the formula prescribed in the bill, the law, that became law, I should say, last year, that a controversial one because it's got a bit of an error in it with respect to the placement of the decimal point in the Senate. You made it very clear that you have no sympathy for the fact that the House didn't see fit to allow the Senate an opportunity to correct their error. I'm not speaking out of turn here.
No.
You made that clear that, you had your chance there, Senate. It passed through.
Went through how many hands?
Lots of hands and eyes.
How many people supposedly read it when they voted on it?
Well, I don't know about that. The key word being there, supposedly, of course, that you rightfully invoked there in your statement.
And I would like to point out the timetable we're talking about here, because the older you are, the shorter a year is relative to your lifespan. So time passes. The old saying, the years fly by, but the days take forever, or whatever it is.
100%.
14 years from now is another generation away.
Completely right.
Sociologists define a generation as every 15 years.
Great point.
So the next generation of working Mississippians will have benefit.
I would be such an example, by the way. So, no, you're right about that. That's 100% right, and appreciate you pointing that out. That's a long dang time. Now, I know this may not be universally popular, but I've made it clear that I was okay with the bill that would have transitioned our approach to raising revenue for the state to a more of a consumption tax. We could have, in a short period of time, eliminated or dramatically reduced the income tax if we would have allowed the state sales tax to be increased. I think a combination of increasing the state sales tax and reducing some of the unnecessary spending within our state government could have allowed us to phase out that income tax in a very much more compressed period of time rather than this 14-year situation that we're dealing with. And also keep in mind that that's about $2.2 billion of revenue currently generated by the state income tax that is on a trend of declining while we've got spending increasing. Are they paying attention to that down there, you think? Because if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. I know you have too, from Mississippians, that we've got to increase teacher pay to remain competitive with the neighboring states. The case can be made for that, for sure. But that does cost money, about $350 million to be exact. And it is true that we're currently enjoying handsome surpluses to the tune of about $400 million this year. And there's a number of reasons and factors for that, but I hesitate to check that box as, this is permanent. I don't think that's the case. And so the main point is, think about your own household. Wow, expenses going up, revenues going down, that's a problem. May not be a problem today, but it could be a problem in the near future. And the legislature will have to grapple with that. But you got that expense, talking about teacher pay. You got Medicaid knocking the door down. We talked to Senator Bryce Wiggins about that yesterday. You're not hearing a lot of that from legislators because they don't want to talk about it. You know that. But Medicaid is facing potential shortfalls. A couple of reasons. One, the cost of health care keeps going up. Two is the effort or the amount of money, required for the state to fulfill its financial obligation in the federal state match program necessitates an increase in Medicaid funding. It's incredible to think about the fact that 700,000 people in the state of Mississippi are on Medicaid. And by the way, that's without expansion. No able-bodied adults. That's just impoverished elderly, low-income elderly, I should say, blind, disabled, pregnant women, and children in low-income homes. They are using the Medicaid system. They are the ones enrolled in the Medicaid system. And that cost us just under $1 billion a year in the state budget. That's the number 2 spending line item behind education, which is a little over $3 billion. It's a bunch of money. We're coming right back with Gordon Fellows with the Bankers Association.
From the sea.
Attention, adoring fans!
It's time for Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio on this St. Patty's Day. It's our great pleasure to welcome now Gordon Fellows, president of the Mississippi Bankers Association. Hey, Gordon, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Gerard, good morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I like your green shirt. It's much greener than my sort of green tie.
That's awesome. So I'm liking the green look of the markets today, at least. We have a positive day in process, and hopefully we'll hang on to the gains through the close today. The markets, as you know, have been beat up pretty severely, including in the financial sector. Which had a really good run up until the war broke out.
Yeah. Let's hope for stability soon in all this.
100%, absolutely. So we wanted to get you on. There's been a lot of stuff. I've run into you at the Capitol a couple of times, and you and I have had some good discussions about much of the fire hose of policy, honestly, Gordon, that's been coming out of both the federal government and downtown in Jackson. But let's start with the Clarity Act. Maybe that's an easy one we can tackle. Your thoughts on that? First, explain that to the folks and how this might affect your members in the banking industry in general.
So I'll start from the very beginning here, right? The Clarity Act deals with digital assets, more commonly known with as cryptocurrency, but specifically with a specific type of cryptocurrency called a stable coin. A stable coin is different from Bitcoin or some other form of cryptocurrency because it has a dollar tied to it to back it. So if there's a stable coin that's issued, it has to have either a bank deposit or U.S. Treasury 1-for-1. So for every coin, there's a dollar behind it, which gives it the term stable, right? Because it's tied to an actual currency. This summer, for the first time, Congress passed something to sort of set up a regulatory structure around this specific type of digital asset, a stable coin, called the Genius Act. And the Genius Act sets up a regulatory process for the companies that issue the stable coins. But there's a whole ecosystem around the coin issuers, right? So the Genius Act sort of sets up a process and regulation for the issuance of coins and how these stable coins can be used for payments. So we know how the payment rules will work, but it didn't really deal with the rest of the ecosystem. Congress's plan was always to sort of do a regulatory bill for the issuance of coins and then also do what's called a market structure bill to set up the markets around how these coins can be used. And if you think about digital assets, cryptocurrencies, they can really be 3 different things. They can be a form of payment, but they can also be a form of investment, or they can also be a commodity. And so you kind of have to regulate them differently at different times depending on which function they are serving. And so Congress, I think, rather smartly sort of said, we're going to treat the payment piece as one bill, and we'll do this clarity market structure bill to handle the investment side and the commodity side. So that's why there were sort of 2 different bills moving. And the president signed the Genius Act into law around July 4th. Yep. Since then, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is the federal agency that regulates national banks, and is also going to be the agency that regulates coin issuers, has put out about a 300-page proposed rule to set the rules of the road. And we think that's important, right? You've heard me say on your show many, many times, bankers aren't anti-regulation. We are pro-good and right regulation.
Yeah.
And there needs to be some regulatory structure around this space. It's very clear digital assets aren't going away, right? And so we need to put structure around it, and I think everybody agrees with that. But then there were some holes that Genius left unfilled that we are hopeful Congress will fill as the market structure bill moves. And one of those holes I think is really important for rural states like ours. And it's one that's gotten a lot of attention. And if you watch the president or the Trump family's Twitter accounts, they've been tweeting about this. And this is a yield issue, right? And so the Genius Act prohibited coin issuers from paying yield on their coins, right? If you think about a bank deposit, it pays interest, which is yield. We sort of said to Congress, this is not the same as a deposit. It's not gonna get lent against. It's not gonna be loaned against. It's not gonna create credit for other people the way a bank deposit was. So you need to treat it separately than a bank deposit and not offer yield on it. And Congress agreed with that, and I think the crypto industry generally agreed with that also. But because the Genius Act only dealt with the coin issuers and not the rest of the ecosystem around it, there's still some holes around can affiliated companies with the coin issuers offer yield on the coins, and that is sort of one of the big questions that is sort of drawing a lot of attention in D.C. right now, and something we're hopeful Congress addresses. Our concern, and I'll just sort of say this sort of directly. Eric Trump's tweet about this last week sort of said this is a Wall Street thing and it's big banks and they just want to hold on to their monopoly. I see it completely differently than that, right? Like our banks in Mississippi are rural, they're small, they're local. America has always benefited from localized distribution of capital, local money, decided by local folks on what we can lend into to grow our economy profitably, right? That's been, I think Alan Greenspan called it in his book American Capitalism, the irrigation of local communities' economic growth. And I'm really worried that if this yield thing isn't solved, then it's gonna create what we call deposit disintermediation, which is a technical word for deposit flight. And if rural community banks lose deposits significantly, then that immediately reduces their lending capacity. And so if you think about the crypto companies that would benefit from people in McGee, Mississippi moving, and I'll use that as an archetype, moving their deposits into a stable coin, whoever benefits from that is very unlikely to make a small business loan in Simpson County. Yeah. Right?
Makes sense.
Same thing around any other community in the state. And so our argument has been, Congress, you got to deal with this yield issue fairly so we don't inadvertently look back in 5 or 6 or 10 years and bank deposits have eroded and the allocation of credit therefore has eroded in rural places because we recognize the payment system is changing. And we made some bad decisions around changing the payment system that inadvertently also eroded access to credit in rural markets. So I see this as a really important issue for rural places. If we don't, our economy is pretty consistent in Mississippi, but we could always use more money in the state, right? And if money flows out of the state because of some policy decisions that were made, kind of with an unintended consequence, then I think we would stand to really have a long-term economic growth problem, and that's really what we're trying to raise a flag on here.
It's just a unique asset, as you've pointed out in your explanation, that it's both a currency and an investment commodity concurrently, and that complicates things. Our regulations, our current regulatory framework isn't built around that. We didn't anticipate that. So It's where does this need to be regulated? Well, maybe both. I'm not sure, but it does make it more complicated. That's for sure. All right, let's turn our attention.
Yeah, there are going to be several federal agencies, right? You're going to have the OCC regulating the coin issuers. If they can get the clarity bill passed and the Commodities and Future Trading Commission, the CFTC, they'll have a regulatory role. The SEC will have a regulatory role. So the path that Congress is trying to set up, I think, is the right path. It's just for us getting this issue of yield kind of solved, so we don't accidentally look back in 5 or 10 years and all of a sudden, like small business lending and mortgage lending and consumer lending is dried up in rural markets because deposits have left the rural markets.
Right.
There's always going to be people that are willing to make loans in places like Atlanta and the Florida, markets and other parts of Nashville, the urban centers where there's a lot of economic activity. There's always going to be money to fund business growth there.
Yeah.
In small markets, we've always sort of said we're going to let the small markets generate their own money, and they can make the investments in growth through bank financing that is built on the back of local deposits. That has been the American community banking model since the 1890s. It's made our country's economy one of the most diverse in the world. It's given us the most diverse banking system in the world, which has given us the freest access to credit of anybody else in the world.
100%.
Right? So you're talking about as technology comes in, sort of making sure we don't accidentally sort of inadvertently change the business model that the country's economic growth has been built on for a long time.
Especially important in a rural state such as Mississippi, where that model you just described is integral and essential to our economic viability, honestly. I mean, that's what we rely on.
That's right. Yeah.
We got a break right here. We'll come back. We can continue this discussion. Want to talk to you about House Bill 1597. That's kind of a debanking regulatory bill. And then we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about the new executive order from the White House concerning the housing industry and mortgages in particular. We got Gordon Fellows, president of the Mississippi Bankers Association, calling in to the Element Wealth studio. Stay with us.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
All right, we are back
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back as Rhino bumps us in with a little Irish music there. Appreciate that. We got Gordon Fellows, president of the Mississippi Bankers Association. So, Gordon, you and I have talked offline a little bit about this House Bill 1597 that essentially seeks to prohibit banks from debanking customers' accounts based on political or religious beliefs. And as you know, there's already something in the works at the federal government, right, to address this. But what are your thoughts on this? And I'll start by just saying I always get worried when government tells me who I can and cannot do business with as a business, that I believe in the free exchange of goods and services between buyer and seller without the dang government sticking their nose in there. What do you think about this, Gordon?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. It's complicated, and I appreciate the perspective you bring to it, Gerard. So I'll sort of start, backing away from it, and then I'll work toward the specific here.
Okay.
The banking industry, has always been built on trust, right? I'm going to put my money in a place, and I'm going to trust the place to take care of my money, help me grow my money, and I'm going to borrow from that place. And they're going to trust that I can pay them back, right? That is the underlying sort of proposition that relationship banking is built on. And it's unfortunate, but during the Obama administration through Operation Choke Point, and then through the Biden administration through Choke Point 2.0, which were Department of Justice driven functions of sort of telling banks through to the DOJ and the FDIC you can't do business with certain types of businesses. Some of that trust sort of began to erode, right? And we raised flags all over the place with both administrations around, look, you can't tell us who we can't do business with, right? Like that's the decision of the private business to make, right? And so I kind of always think about access to banking as a fair access issue, right? Like if you are a customer that has a need that the bank thinks they can help you fill, and you think the bank can help you, then you ought to be able to go forward together if you're a legal business, right? And there's some fair lending laws, so the caveat is the bank's got to meet their fair lending law requirements. But if a bank is giving general fair access to any of its customers, that's good and important. But the bank also has the right to sort of deny access. I think of it like no shoes or no shirts, you can't come into a restaurant, right? If you're a customer that borrows money but doesn't pay it back, right, or it generates a whole bunch of administrative work for things like Bank Secrecy Act and money laundering and compliance problems, he calls banks general compliance problems. Or, a bank may have over concentrations in a certain market, right? Like if I'm in a couple towns and I've made a bunch of hotel loans in those towns, maybe I don't want to make another hotel loan, right? So there are real business reasons where a bank may say, in a certain instance, either because of regulatory costs or concentration risk, or some other issue, I can't make you a loan right now. I can't provide you services right now. And I think banks ought to have that right because they are private businesses, right? So long as the decision is made on a business informed basis, right? Yeah. Not a political basis, right? So that's sort of the way we think about these things, right? And debanking sort of specifically has gotten a lot of attention. In large part because President Trump claims he's been debanked, and I understand why that would get attention, right? Sure. What I can say is I don't know of anybody in Mississippi that is doing anything like that. I've heard talk at the Capitol about some folks that have been debanked, but I don't think it's been by Mississippi banks. In fact, I don't think it's been by banks. I think it's been by other financial service providers. Your point of is the legislature trying to solve for something that maybe inserts itself in a way that private businesses ought to be able to handle, I think is a valid point. On this specific bill you're talking about, 1597, we've been neutral on it. We had lots of conversations with all the interested parties on it. We helped come up with some language that we could live with in the House. Ultimately, we sort of said, to your point, the president is doing a good job on debanking. If the legislature wants to do anything in that space and address debanking, the best route forward is to take the president's executive order and make it statute, because the president's executive order is tightening the goalpost on the regulators that have been the federal agencies that have been creating this problem.
That's 100% right.
I don't think we've had this problem with state regulators.
No, that's 100% right. Yeah, we got a break right now, and we got a break at the top of the hour. Can you hang on, Gordon? You got to go today.
Yeah, sure.
Because I want to get to the mortgage. So I want to continue this discussion on the other side of the break, and then talk to you about this new mortgage executive order, if you will, as well. Gordon Fellows, president of the Mississippi Bankers Association, is our guest calling into the Element Wealth studio. I'll just say before we go that I just believe as a business person, I have the right to do business or not do business with anyone I want for any reason or not any reason whatsoever. It's my belief, as long as the parties can agree on the terms of whatever that transaction is. Coming right back.
Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays from the Element Wealth studio on this St. Patrick's Day. We are continuing our discussion with Gordon Fellows, president of the Mississippi Bankers Association. So Gordon, I guess just to kind of wrap up this discussion about this debanking law. I'd say a couple of things. Bill as it is right now, House Bill 1597, and it simply says, just to remind the audience, that bank services could not be denied, or customers of banks could not be debanked, essentially have their accounts closed for political or religious reasons. First of all, I'd say, last time I checked, Gordon, banks like money, and they really don't care for the most part what your political and your religious beliefs are, as long as you meet the terms of and conditions of whatever your contract for whatever your accounts are. That's the first thing I'd say. Second thing, how is this any different than when we were outraged, we on the right, a few years ago, when a baker was sued because he refused to bake a cake for a gay couple wedding? Same deal. He felt like that it conflicted with his religious views, thus he chose not to do business with him. Well, go down the street and find a baker that will bake you a dang cake. And then the third thing I'd say is, banks are not stupid. They're interested in customers that are going to make them money at the end of the day. Customers are a source of revenue and profit. If they did debank these people for these reasons, I would say, well, you're dumb. I support your right to do it, but that's not very smart business, and you're probably not a very good bank, honestly, if you do that. I'll let you wrap that up, and then let's talk about the mortgage stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you just said, I agree with, and couldn't disagree with you more. I will say, on like I said, on 1597, we've been neutral on it because the House sort of accepted a lot of our suggestions on how to improve it, which was premised on, if you're going to do this, you need to follow what the Trump administration is doing because they're handling it well. Yeah. 1597 died. And the House took part of 1597 and put it on a safe deposit box bill that the Senate passed, but it left out the Trump part. And so we're reassessing that and trying to figure out what we think about it without the Trump part in it. But I think the interesting thing, the important thing here, and this kind of bleeds into the next topic, executive orders sort of come and go every time the White House changes. So it's really important for Congress to codify them, or for agencies to create regs to enforce them that are pretty permanent, right? It takes once a regulation gets established, it takes a long time for the next administration to undo it. It's very easy for a president to undo an executive order. It's much harder for the next administration to undo a regulation from the previous regulation. Yeah. And so what I think is really positive in the debanking space, since the legislature started, in fact, just 10 days ago or so, the Federal Reserve has issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. So a proposed rule that would create a new regulation federally around debanking that I think will do more to solve this problem than the Mississippi legislature can. And so I think that's important. And what I think my message to the audience in Mississippi here is like you said, there's what banks look for is business here, right? So we're not, my members aren't looking to make political points, to get involved in social issues one way or the other. Yeah. We just want to provide services to our communities, right? And everybody in the community. And so, this is a complicated issue because there's a lot of sort of political opinions on it. I would encourage Mississippians to think about their banker, their local leader in their bank, and sort of say, is that the kind of person that's going to make a political decision or a decision that's right for our community? And I think 100 times out of 100, it's going to be, the local people here are going to make decisions that are right for our community. Yeah, that's a great point. Heck, I have greater concerns, honestly, Gordon, about the large number of Mississippians that don't have any banking relationship, right? We are, last I checked, the least banked state in America. That's a bigger concern because I think that leads to all sorts of issues that are problematic for our government and for society in general. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I said, to go back to, this is why I raised this point earlier, right? The banking relationship is built on trust. And so when I'm talking to my members in education events, I like to remind bankers, you got to go out and you got to earn that trust every day, just like an athlete's got to go earn a win every day, right? And so we as an industry have always got to be improving on that. The bankers around the state have always got to be working to build more trust with more people in their communities all the time. And so, yeah, it is a problem. We are the most unbanked state in the country by maybe 1.5 points over Arkansas and West Virginia. The three of us are always kind of passing that baton back and forth between the three of us. It's tied to economics that are pretty big and macro that I think we as a state are doing a lot to address, and I hope this problem continues to get better.
Housing affordability is certainly something that's gotten a lot of attention over the last year or so, and the lack thereof of housing affordability. The president steps in with an executive order not too long ago to try to shake loose the logjam there. What do you think about those policies? What are your members saying?
Yeah, I think you started this with a comment about the stock markets in reaction to the war in Iran. That's been getting all the attention and all the news, but kind of late Friday afternoon, so this is pretty breaking now here on Tuesday, the White House issued a pretty comprehensive executive order that specifies certain regulatory changes that different agencies like the CFPB and the FDIC have to make to the way they regulate mortgage loans. And one of the, I think, unfortunate sort of impacts of the housing crisis in 2008, 2009, and the Dodd-Frank regulatory structuring that happened after that, and the Basel, which is a town in Switzerland, global capital standard changes that happened after that, is that mortgage lending became pretty cookie cutter, which really eliminated the ability for tailoring mortgage loans for specific clients, which is the community bank business model, right? The community banks are really good at sort of saying customer A needs something, customer B needs something different. Let's come up with something that works for both of them, a different product for both of them, right? That's the relationship business model in a nutshell. And the regulatory structure around mortgages and the capital needed to hold more for mortgages disincentivized that sort of localized innovation. And so I think what the president is trying to do here is to pull back some of that regulatory structure to encourage more community banks to get more involved in the mortgage markets in their community and tailor their mortgage products specifically to the needs of the communities. And if you think about it just in Mississippi, right, the mortgage needs in Tunica are pretty different than the mortgage needs in Tupelo, which are also pretty different than the mortgage needs in Taylorsville, right? So just, it's allowing banks to sort of be fluid as they move between markets or as mortgage needs changes in their markets is really what this is intended to do. So I don't think it'll lead to a lot of immediate shifts, but we'll have to see how the agencies implement it. Like I said a few minutes ago, if it stays only in executive order form, I don't know how many banks will really make a bunch of changes to their models. Because the next president's probably going to eliminate the executive order. But if the agencies can put some permanency around it, then we'll be able to probably see change. But that takes a long time, right? That takes 18, 24 months sometimes. So, and then if you get toward the end of the presidency, it could be repealed, right? So that becomes a challenge too.
I think nothing could be more stimulative for the housing industry than clocking in some positive news on the inflation front, such that the Federal Reserve sees fit to lower rates. I think that would go a long way towards addressing the housing affordability problem. Until we see that, I'm not sure any of these actions honestly are going to have any material impact on the market.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, this is a long-term adjustment here, right? If it's material, it's going to be material in not quarters but years.
Yeah, I agree, and I know this one of those provisions of the order was just to restrict institutional investors on buying single-family homes. Not as big an issue in Mississippi. You see that around Nashville, Austin, kind of the in-demand areas where they're getting ahead of that. And honestly, they're typically buying those properties and then they're leasing them. They're not actually selling them. How big an issue that is, it's difficult to measure, honestly, what its impact is. But that's in there. We got about 30 seconds left.
There are a lot of really Yeah, well, there are a lot of really technical parts of the rule or the executive order that's going to change a lot of CFPB rules, like the ability to repay rule and the qualified mortgage rule. And some of those changes could be helpful, but like I said, it's going to take a really long time to get those implemented.
Gotcha. Gordon Fellows, the president of the Mississippi Bankers Association. Always good to talk to you, Gordon. Thanks for coming on, man. See you.
Thanks for having me on. Happy St. Paddy's Day.
Absolutely. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
And now, the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
Now, on to the real part.
Dynamite! On SuperTalk Mississippi.
While in the merry month of May, not from me home I started, left the girls at Hume and nearly broken heart, saluted father dear, kissed me darling mother, drank a pint of beer, me grief and tears are smothered enough to reap the corn, leave where I was born, caught a stout black tarn to banish ghosts and goblins, brand new pair of brogues to rat the love of the bogs, frighten all the dogs on the rocky road to Dublin, 1 2 3 4 5, hunt the hare and turn her down the rocky road and all the ways to Dublin, whack for lolly ride.
Okay, the name of that song I'm looking on the system here, The Rocky Road to Dublin. You can't see on the screen who's the artist there, the Kings. Kings of what? Kings of something.
Connacht.
Ah, gotcha. New York City spending $81,000 per homeless person. This broke last night. 81 grand. But yet, the mayor, communist Zoran Mondani, he's calling for higher taxes. First, he wants to increase property taxes. You saw that. We have no choice. We have this $5.5 billion deficit. We got to raise property taxes, which, of course, would raise property taxes directly and indirectly on the people that he claims to be champions for, the middle class, the so-called middle class. But the latest, if you hadn't seen that, which is just mind-boggling, he wants to impose a city estate tax. And he wants that estate tax to be, I think they actually have one now. Maybe the only city in America that actually has an estate tax. Check me out on that. And I think it's, 9-10% of all of the value of the estate over $7 million. I think that's present law. You checking that out? That's either New York or it's New York City. And he wants to reduce that to $750,000, which is a bungalow. That's like a studio apartment in New York. And he wants to levy a 50% tax on the value over the estate in excess of $750,000. I don't know about this guy, and I sure do hope people are waking up and realizing how destructive his tax plans are, his spending plans, of course, driving what he thinks is the need for all these higher taxes. This is just mind-boggling. To me, an estate tax. You work your whole dang life to build a little value, a little portfolio of assets, little net worth, but then you die and you got to cough it up. I already have problems with the federal estate tax, but now he wants to go after the middle class, the same people he says that he was elected to serve, and the ones who ostensibly swept him into office. This is an estate tax exemption threshold from the $7 million limit to $750,000. If you're keeping score, that's a drop of 90%. And then he wants to increase the top rate to a whopping 50%. It's currently the top rate actually is 16%. This is mind-boggling. So lowering the exemption would hit a lot closer to home than people realize. And that's because maybe this fool is woken up. There's just so much you can shake down the rich people for to pay for all these programs. But what about this homeless population that's ballooned in New York City that they're spending $81,000 on? I can't even comprehend that. And it's true. If you look at the total cost divided by the total number of homeless, as they've calculated it, and you look at all the dang programs they have, from housing and food and utility assistance and everything else they do, yeah, it turns out it's $81,000. Now, that's not $81,000 going into their pocket that they go spend. They're spending it. It's being filtered through
it's
all
going
these...
into the pockets of people claiming to help the homeless.
Correct. Not the actual homeless. That's the point I'm making. It's the shakedown artists, similar to what we've witnessed in Minnesota with all these NGOs that were shaking down the child care provisions of the federal Medicaid program and laundering the money back to Somalia. And here what we have are a bunch of do-gooder, virtuous program operators and facilitators that are getting all this dang money from the taxpayers and sticking it in their pocket. And a little bit of it makes its way to the homeless. But when you calculate it out, it's $81,000 per person. Even the comptroller of New York City affirmed that, by the way. These aren't numbers that right-leaning media is making up, not numbers we're making up. This is from the comptroller, the chief accountant, if you will. The person who's responsible for preparing the financial statements. He doesn't deny it. Yeah, it's $81,000. Unfreaking believable. And this guy wants more. It's not enough. I got to go get more. We're going to have to lower the estate tax exemption from $750K or $7 million to $750K. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And guess what? The population of homeless grows in the city because there's a lot more programs for them. Who's shocked at that? Something else I wanted to get in here about this debanking bill, which I actually think is a solution looking for a problem. And I know a lot of people think that this would be good legislation, and I don't quarrel with them. That's fine. I believe in markets sorting these things out. And this is different when you've got a private sector matter between service provider, that being a bank, and the consumer, that being those who have loans or demand deposit, that would be checking accounts, savings accounts in a bank, held by a bank. It's a little different than government. And what I'm talking about there, it reminded me of Lois Lerner. You guys remember her? She was the director of the Exempt Organizations Unit of the Federal Internal Revenue Service, I think dating back to 2005, and I think she stayed in that role until about 2013. But what happened in the middle of that time period? Barack Obama. And what I recall, Rhino, was that there were a number of organizations seeking not-for-profit status, which you have to apply for with the Internal Revenue Service. It's a formality. It requires some documentation and some legal work. Not onerous, honestly, but that should just go through with little problem if you're legitimate non-for-profit. Well, this fool Lois Lerner, a radical leftist ideologue that oversaw this department that grants not-for-profit status at the Internal Revenue Service, she just decided on her own accord, well, if they're conservative groups, we're just not going to give them not-for-profit. So several of those banded together and sued the federal government for wrongdoing, and she then was called to testify. And it was mainly, you remember, it was Tea Party groups. That was back when the Tea Party was really taking hold in this country, and that was in response to Obamacare. And recall what happened is after Obamacare passed in 2010, that was in the spring of 2010, I think March, and then the midterms occurred in November of 2010, and Republicans flipped the House in an election that the president, Barack Obama, described as a shellacking. I'll never forget that. That was his word. Flipped, I don't know, like 45 seats or something to that effect. And so they called Lois Lerner up to testify. How come you're denying non-for-profit status to all these Tea Party groups? And I just remember her smug, condescending facial expressions, speech up there on the Hill, looking down, I felt, to Americans, not just the Republican members of Congress who were asking her questions, but to patriotic Americans that under our Constitution were assembling into these Tea Party organizations across the country that were trying to promote good free market policy and defend against the overreach of the Obama administration. Simple as that. But she just decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands and acted unlawfully. That's different because that's a right under law that is extended to all Americans. That's different than a private company where that's not a place for government, in my view. So I'll never forget that. Oh, Lois Lerner, I was mad the whole dang time that was going on. That smug, I just wanted to, I wanted to slap that old smug, half-crooked smile off her face. She was proud of the fact that she was denying this nonprofit status. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio, John McKay with the Mississippi Business Alliance at 12:05.
From the Seabrook, Middays with Gerard Gibert. It is on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back on St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Thanks for joining us in the Element Wealth studio. Middays with me will be at the Westin in downtown Jackson tomorrow. I'll be there for the Madison County Business League and Foundation, along with Pracon Global Investment Group's annual luncheon with keynote speaker, Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. Looking forward to that. The C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. Are you thinking about or planning for retirement? Do you have a plan? Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income, growth, and guarantees. Also, Rhino, I think tomorrow there is an event going on that's going to celebrate the life and legacy of former Senator Thad Cochran. That is going to be held at noon. It's free. It's going to be held at 2 Mississippi museums tomorrow. So that should be a really good event. The late, great senator, longtime senator of the state of Mississippi is, I think, going to be celebrated at this event. Current executive director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation, Brad White, alerted me to this morning. Of course, Brad worked as chief of staff for the senator for a long time and was a close confidant and friend of the senator. So that should be an interesting event.
Yeah, they're going to have former Governor Haley Barbour, Mark Keenum, Leslie Southwick, Nehemiah Flowers.
I think Dr. Keenum worked for Thad as well, right? Yeah. So, okay. So quite the lineup there of political figures from the great state of Mississippi.
And they're going to stream the event.
Oh, that's cool.
It's going to be on the Department of Archives and History's Facebook and YouTube.
Gotcha. So, yesterday we were talking to Senator Bryce Wiggins about the civics bill. And actually, I guess it's maybe there's a separate bill, but a provision in another bill that would require, that's the bottom line, require the instruction of civics as a formal class And what did he tell us, Rhino? In the grades, somewhere in grades 9 through 12, across all public schools, that would be a mandate. I'm a little surprised to find out many schools don't have a civics class. When I went to school, and I know that was a long time ago, you had in the 9th grade, the first semester, the pre-Christmas semester, fall semester, that was focused on Mississippi history. And the second semester was civics. I can still picture the book, the red, white, blue book with the big block letters civics on the front of it. And the senator pointed out yesterday that there's a big misunderstanding about this legislation. He also told us that, it died over here. You got to understand how all the deadlines work, and the dead. In fact, we have a deadline today, as a matter of fact. And he felt confident, I believe is what he said, that ultimately this requirement would make its way into legislation that got to the governor's desk and would be enacted into law, thus requiring all K-12 schools in the state of Mississippi. Actually, the 9th through 12th grades is where it would be required to be taught the subject of civics. So my friend, Representative Fred Shanks, sent me a text about that yesterday I didn't get to. He said, when Michael Guest and I were running, Congressman Michael Guest, of course, at the same time, several people in town came up to me during that time. We were both running for office, asking if we were mad at each other. And I couldn't quite figure out why they kept saying that, as we're pretty close, and they're also cousins. He said most people didn't know the difference between someone running for the state house and the U.S. House. You're shaking your head. You're not surprised at this. That does, I think, indicate a strong need for the teaching of civics. And I think what the senator had to explain yesterday is, hey, because a measure passes in one chamber, it doesn't become law until it passes in the other. That's our system, intentionally designed that way by the founders. And
even then it doesn't become law. It's got to be signed by the
governor. Right. And the same at the federal level. The state process is a microcosm replication, if you will, of the federal system, which requires House, Senate, and President. And I do think we need to teach this. It's incumbent upon us as society to ensure that our young people, before they get out of high school, understand. Maybe we need to revive the old Schoolhouse Rock videos, right? I'm just a bill sitting on the steps of the Capitol. That was well done. I remember it. That's 50 years ago or so. So I'd say that's pretty effective. It is a good way to teach, no doubt. People think and they remember visuals and tunes and catchy words and phrases. That's not a bad way to teach, honestly, rather than just digging your nose in a book, reading a bunch of boring text.
Just playing devil's advocate, though, is in a time of Schoolhouse Rock, there was not a whole lot else for young people to watch.
Yes, you're right about that.
They were not being pulled in a million different directions by every single influencer on the planet trying to get their attention.
On TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and all the social media platforms. That's a good point. You're right about that.
But it also comes back to a conversation we've had about TikTok.
Yeah.
The algorithm in America for TikTok is basically brain rot. It directs you towards brain rot. That same app in China, where it's housed, it directs you towards educational material, teaching the foundational principles of engineering or physics.
I know you've shared that before. That seems like that's a pretty dang good idea, isn't it? They kind of have us on that one, I would say. Imagine if TikTok in this country were flooded with instructional videos like that. Because they're going to stop and watch them. And they may not really care about the subject matter, but they'll stay interested if you can make the videos interesting enough to capture their attention and just get a couple of quick points out there. Like, hey, it takes all three to make a law here. 2 seconds, right? Rather than going through life thinking, oh, well, it passed the House, so that means it's law. Instead of that. Or people mistaking Fred Shanks and Michael Guest as opponents of each other for the same seat. Maybe we can fix that. And maybe this is a problem, what I'm about to share, is that recent polls, and this is not anything new, but these are some new recent polls, indicate that almost half of young Americans look favorably on a socialism. It's like having a favorable opinion of a root canal, as far as I'm concerned. Termites may be something that is usually not viewed very favorably. It's just incredible. So where are we failing? Where are we failing? Why aren't they getting it?
I mean, we failed by not imprisoning every single leftist terrorist from the 70s.
That's a good point. And I know you've shared that with me.
All the crazy hippies and the Weather Underground just went into academia.
That's totally true. And sad but true.
Instead of blowing up the people they hate, they just indoctrinated their kids.
I agree. And I know that on the C-Spire text line, Rusty on the 662 says the residents of New York are getting what they voted for. That's after our discussion of Mondami's estate tax and property tax proposals. He's looking for a way. Hey, don't even think about cutting the programs to $81,000 per homeless resident of New York City. Now, a lot of that comes from the federal government, but the state in New York and the city pile on a bunch of money, as evidenced by, we looked it up the other day, their budget's $120 billion, right, in New York City for 8 million people. Florida has 22, 23 with a similar budget, as I recall. You think the quality of life is better in New York City than Florida? And not to say that there aren't people in New York City that live a fantastic lifestyle. They're also rich for the most part. But it's not as if you can't achieve a high quality of life in the state of Florida. That's the point. Without spending 3 times as much money at the government level. Well, here's what I was about to say to Rusty that is bothersome, Rusty. That fool, as of late January, has a 68% approval rating. Now, I admit, this is before all these policies really take hold, but that rhetoric he's spewing is captivating them and influencing them positively. It's unbelievable. Now, is net favorability, that's the favorables less the unfavorables, at the end of February, that wasn't but a couple of weeks ago, was 48 points. Statewide, 45 to 48% approval. That's just amazing to me. But I also think that's because it hasn't affected them directly, personally, yet. Unbelievable. When we come back, I got to talk about a new term, 1%ism. We're in the Element Wealth studio.
Polyupa, Mississippi.
You know what that means.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
We'll do it live
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Middays from the Element Wealth studio. After the top of the hour, John McKay, President and CEO of the Mississippi Business Alliance. Don't forget, tomorrow we're going to be down at the Westin in downtown Jackson for the Madison County Business League and Foundation and Pracon Global Investment Group's annual luncheon. It's a big one, too. Well attended. We'll be set up just outside the big ballroom there, hosting the show. Got a great guest lineup for you as well. Mississippi history and civics were exactly the same in my high school days as you described. I graduated in 1980, says Ricky in Aberdeen. Exactly. And I don't know how we got to discontinue that. What happened along the lines? That I found those to be interesting classes, honestly. Studying the history of the state you were born and raised in, I thought was pretty cool. I wasn't aware of all that history until I took Mississippi history. And, of course, you don't think about it when you're growing up in the modern day, but our state largely inhabited, settled by Indians, and originally the various tribes across the state, and still remnants of that in place today. So I thought that was fascinating history, honestly.
And that's a history that we're still learning more and more about.
That's a good point. We sure are.
Like, it seems like every year we learn more and more about the mound building culture that eventually led to the Choctaws and Chickasaws.
That's a good point. Exactly right. My dad, a native New Orleanian, moved to Mississippi in 1953 with my mom and my brother before I was born. Always talked about how New Orleans, as you know, is below sea level. And he always said, I think Ponce de Leon just got off the boat a little early. He should have gone up the river a little more and put the flag down. Didn't know what kind of problems that was going to cause, right? That's pretty cool. Also, someone points out, bills in Mississippi don't have to be signed by the governor, technically speaking, to become law. I think it's 5 days after they pass the House and Senate and are received by the governor officially. If he doesn't act, you're right. That's a nuance in our law. And
still got to be sent to the governor.
That's right. Still got to get through. That's a rare occasion that happens. I did want to talk about, earlier we were discussing how young people in this country seem to be enamored with socialism. And, I was up at Ole Miss last week and was one of two panelists, if you will, that were on the same side of the pro-free enterprise, anti-socialism bandwagon. And we had a couple of students that showed up that were pro-socialism that shared their thoughts with us, and we had engaging, very civil conversation about that. And it seems like it always boils down, as you know, we've talked about this, pointing to Scandinavia and how happy people are. And I refer to that as incumbency. And here's what I mean by that. Most everything that they utilize for the quality of life in their society was invented under capitalism in this country. That's not to say there aren't some companies that are based and located there that have innovated. I read about one the other day that's got some pretty novel artificial intelligence technology, and the founders just hit the Forbes billionaire list. They're both under 30. Sure, there are exceptions. There's pockets of that. But overall, in general, it's the system of free enterprise that promotes, instills, engenders innovation. And it's innovation that improves the quality of life. So I like to describe it, and this is what I told the young people. I started out by saying, anybody in here ever filed a tax return? Well, no, not at that age, unless they maybe worked a little part-time, in which case that's nothing, right? You're not paying any dang taxes. But as a person, like all the adults that are tuned into us that have filed a bunch of tax returns, you start to figure it out. And I then went on to explain the contrast in the tax system over here and the tax system over there. And I'd like for it to even improve over here. But in Sweden, for example, and I researched it before I did the event, you hit $62,000 of income, everything over that's taxed at 56%. Oh, but you get free health care and child care and education.
And every single thing you buy on the shelf is taxed at 25%.
That's correct as well, because of the VAT tax that they have in place, which is just an incredibly onerous, layered consumption tax, like a sales tax on steroids.
So if you get ahead, you give the government half, and you're paying a 25% tax on everything you buy.
Correct. So the point I like to make, and I still do believe this in my heart and mind, is that it's capitalism where one can be rewarded for the value they create for society. That expands the economic pie. Whereas under a system of socialism, it's focused on cutting the economic pie, not growing it, not expanding it. They don't really care. Let's just redistribute it all up, cut it all up to make everybody equal. If capitalism hadn't created all of those assets and tools and resources and amenities that they use in their lifestyle, they wouldn't have anything to cut. That's just the truth. We're coming right back after Fox News and SuperTalk News with John McKay. Stay with us.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello? You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Hour 3, the afternoon portion of Middays, coming at you from the Element Wealth Studio. It's our great pleasure to welcome now John McKay, President and CEO of the Mississippi Business Alliance. John, thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
So first, how's it going? The combination of the three organizations that you and the heads of the other two came into this studio a year or so ago to talk about that announcement coming together?
Yeah, no, it's everything's going great. We sort of it was a long process, but through all of the different maneuvers, we fully integrated on January 1 and hit the ground running. Unfortunately, in a merger situation like that, with the legislative session falling right on top of it, it's been a little chaotic, but really great. The staffs have come together, and we are just humming along, and couldn't be more grateful for the support of my membership and everybody that's been pulling in the same direction.
Okay, so you would generally kind of describe the organization as the state's Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah,
is that fair?
No, we are absolutely. We are recognized as the state's Chamber of Commerce by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we're also the affiliate of the National Association of Manufacturers for Mississippi. So we have those designations and are recognized as such. And so, we represent a very, very broad base of business interests, from manufacturing, healthcare, banking and finance, hospitality, the whole gamut.
Yeah. And so a lot of your work involves tracking legislation, of course, and public policy and meeting with legislators. Sometimes it's to educate them on the need for certain policy or maybe to educate them on policy that you'd like to see amended or changed or not become law. I mean, that happens as well.
Absolutely. And I tell people all the time that I am a lobbyist. I'm a registered lobbyist. But I tell people what that really means is an educator. Yeah. You can't expect folks to come into the legislature and know everything. Yeah. They have various backgrounds, real estate, farming, all sorts of things, and they have to be educated on all these nuances. And that's my role, is to figure out what policies actually do in practice to the average people. And obviously, I'm concerned with the impact on businesses and their employees. And so really trying to explain that to folks that really might not have any background in that particular area.
Yeah. And to a great extent, you rely on your members to inform and educate you, right?
Absolutely. And I could not do what I do without that engagement by my members to not only explain how things impact them, but then also, look, I can go and talk to legislators until I'm blue in the face. It goes a lot further when my members reach out directly to them and say, hey, I'm not only a business owner in your district, but I'm a voter. Yeah. And this is important to me. That really helps deliver that message that I, of course, am at the Capitol doing. But it really goes a long way when they hear directly from their businesses in their district.
Makes sense. Okay, so with respect to the 2026 legislative session, not just a whole lot of high-profile legislation maybe that would have an impact on the business community in the state of Mississippi. One in particular that's extremely contentious right now that you're familiar with is HB 1665. That concerns some reforms to the regulatory framework around pharmacy benefit managers. You had a House version of the bill. It went down to the Senate, got amended a bit in the Senate. You had some senators that weren't pleased with those amendments. They voted against it. But ultimately, that legislation passed the Senate, but it got marked up, so it will be headed to conference. Or it could go back for concurrence, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's right. So where it is in the process is it's back in the possession of the House, and they have a decision to either concur or invite conference. And we were pretty disappointed with the changes made in the Senate. A couple of issues that I'd love to talk to you about. But now the House, it's up to them. And so, two of the biggest changes in the Senate version that I would point out is, number one, they included a dispensing fee. So this is a mandatory fee that's added on to the price of each prescription tied to the Medicaid rate. And so the Medicaid rate is $11.29 for each prescription. And so that was added in there. The other thing they did, the House version put the regulatory and oversight function at the Department of Insurance. And what the Senate did was take it back to the Board of Pharmacy. And we think the correct policy avenue on that is to have it at an impartial agency that deals with complicated insurance matters. I mean, these folks deal with insurance issues day in and day out. And PBMs are part of the insurance infrastructure. I mean, you just can't deny that. And
it's insurance.
It is absolutely insurance. And they deal with insurers, they deal with plans, they deal with pharmaceutical manufacturers, the whole bit. And it just makes sense to have that regulatory oversight at the Department of Insurance.
Yeah. Well, how does the commissioner feel about that? Have you had any conversations with him?
Well, I've talked to him, and this is obviously not a new issue, so it's been going on for several years. Yeah. And I've talked to him on and off, and it was originally at the Department of Insurance, and I don't know how long ago, maybe 15 years ago, was put over at the Board of Pharmacy. And look, you have a Board of Pharmacy that is largely made up of independent community pharmacists. And it just makes sense to have that regulatory function, not even have the appearance of impropriety that
feels like a conflict.
It does, and you could have the same argument at any of our regulatory boards that you want an impartial group to really oversee that function. And so I think if the legislature were able to give some resources so that the commissioner could fulfill that function, I think he would take it back on. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it would be an expansion of his scope for sure.
That's right.
Already, of course, he regulates all other forms of insurance.
That's right.
I think this one just got kind of lapped under the purview of the pharmacy board, but this really doesn't have anything to do with dispensing pharmaceuticals. It has to do more with the accounting than anything else, right? The economic aspect of it.
And in this whole issue, I do want to point out that we at MSBA, the business community, we put a letter on the desks of senators that were co-signed by more than a dozen trade associations. This is much larger than just my organization.
Sure.
We support PBM reform.
Okay.
We recognize that there is several potential issues in this space. We also recognize that pharmacies around the state fulfill a vital function. So that is not up for debate. And we feel like we've come to the table in good faith to look at all of the pricing issues and the reimbursement issues and the auditing and the record keeping, all the things that I've heard. I mean, I'm friends with pharmacists, and I've talked to them. I've heard their concerns, and we absolutely think that those need to be addressed. The dispensing fee portion is really problematic, and I'd be happy to give you kind of an example of what that might look like.
Yeah, that's fine. And I just want to add, that's what got added in the Senate. That's what got amended in the Senate. It didn't come from the House with that. The Senate, for whatever reason, added that provision. Tell the folks how that works.
And so, again, this is a very complicated space. So I'll just give you a for instance. Most of us, especially of a certain age, take a daily maintenance medication.
Sure.
And typically, some of us maybe take more than one.
Yep.
So these are typically low-cost generic drugs. And so when you go to the pharmacy, a lot of this stuff has been negotiated on the back end between the PBM and insurers and the pharmacy. And you pay, let's say, $3 or $4 for a 30-day supply of your daily medication, right? If you added this dispensing fee on top of that, and let's say your copay is $15, well, your $3 medication would then go to $14 and some change.
Right. That
would be a direct impact that you would feel at the counter. Well, let's say that you have a different prescription that may be a little higher cost. Your copay might not change. So that $15 or $25 medication that you pay at the counter, well, that cost is higher on the back end. So your plan is picking up a large portion of that. Well, this dispensing fee would be added on top of that.
Okay.
You wouldn't pay it necessarily at the counter, but your plan would pay it. And you know just as well as anybody, insurance companies are going to add that number up at the end of the year, and your premiums for next year are going to go up.
You're going to pay for it, indirectly, essentially.
And unfortunately, employers are going to be put in this position of deciding, okay, how much of that can we absorb? How much of that are we going to pass down to our employees as higher premiums? Or are we going to change our plan?
Right.
So now we have a $15 copay. Now our bottom copay might have to be $30.
Okay.
It's one of those things that, and I understand a lot of legislators are trying to help their independent pharmacists, and in some of their communities, it might be the only outlet for pharmacy distribution.
Yeah.
We want to help them, but not on the backs of every other person in the state.
So this dispensing fee, that would stay with the pharmacist, right?
That's correct.
The insurance company would be reimbursing them, including this dispensing fee.
That is correct.
The consumer ultimately pays for it through their premiums or their out-of-pocket.
That's
at the counter.
Yep.
So, okay. We'll keep talking.
Okay,
You're
great.
good to go?
Absolutely.
Yep. John McKay, President and CEO of Mississippi Business Alliance in the Element Wealth Studio, coming right back.
In Mississippi.
Check it out. Let's do this. The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's get on with it.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
We are back in the Element Wealth Studio. We're having a conversation with John McKay, he's President and CEO of the Mississippi Business Alliance, which essentially is the state of Mississippi's Chamber of Commerce. So the PBM bill, you know this, it's extremely complicated.
It is.
And there's a fine line between how do we make sure that we don't damage the independent pharmacy market in the state to the point we have these deserts without pharmacists, right? That's an issue, especially in a rural state like Mississippi where our population is widely dispersed. That just complicates all this sort of stuff. But by the same token, we don't want to increase costs to employers who are also paying, in some cases, the lion's share of healthcare premiums. And so PBMs do serve an important function. You can't deny that.
Absolutely.
In that process.
That's the thing. You know, there's no law that says you have to use a PBM.
Right, exactly.
There's a reason that companies utilize this industry, and you know, a lot of the focus is on the big three. You hear the big three PBMs, and those are typically the vertically integrated. And I understand the problem with that. Quite frankly, I think that's a federal issue that
100%.
Congress should get off their backside and handle, or the Federal Trade Commission.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the avenues where you address these type of monopolistic environments.
Sure.
And that's a path. That path has not been utilized, and so it's all come down to the state. Every state has instituted different versions of this type of regime of regulatory oversight. And I think there are so many ways we can handle this. You know, if it's the policy position of the state that these, especially in the rural areas, it's so important to have a retail pharmacy in X location. Look, we can try to do a grant program. I mean, there's all these avenues that should be on the table, and we'd be happy to be a partner in that discussion. But it seems like it always comes back to this dispensing fee, which, the argument's made that, that's applied to Medicaid. Well, you know as well as I do. First of all, the federal government picks up 85-90% of the Medicaid bill. Mm-hmm. So we're not on the hook for that. And so having a dispensing fee in the Medicaid program is neither here nor there. That's apples and oranges. So we need to get serious about the reform. We are for the reform. I want everybody to be clear. We agree the reform is needed. The National Association of Manufacturers has worked years in Congress, and they finally got something over the finish line a couple of months ago in one of the budget packages.
Okay.
That dealt mainly with the Medicaid program and some of that PBM oversight. But look, it's needed. We want to be a partner in that push, but this is just one of those areas where it doesn't make sense to put that burden on the employers and ultimately the employees.
Yeah, we already have. I'm sure you're hearing it from your members about healthcare premiums going up this year. It's a huge expense.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I saw a survey the other day of businesses, and a lot of those were manufacturers, but it was businesses across the board. Outside of cost increases, mainly related to trade and tariff issues, the number 2 issue that kept people up at night, healthcare costs. It is a driver of decision making, and look, we can't ignore the fact that the system we have is the system we have.
Yeah.
And employers provide the vast majority of that coverage outside of the big 2 government programs. And if we keep pushing costs, and look, the legislature every year, about a dozen bills are introduced to mandate things be covered by health insurance. And each of those things are important, and they're health issues that we would love everybody to be covered for. But again, it just drives costs.
Costs money.
It does. Somebody's paying the bill, and it's these employers that pay the premiums. And unfortunately, we've got to really have a conversation about what we can afford to pay for and what we're going to let the free market pick up.
Yeah, and I appreciate you making that point. It's one that I've made many times on the program, which is outside of Medicaid and Medicare, the 2 big federal insurance programs, which account for, last I checked, about 150 million people, I think, most people get their coverage from their employer. Mm-hmm. It's 80% or so of the commercial coverage comes from the employer, not the individual market, and it's 60-70%, I think, of the total insured. So, and it's a huge expense.
It's a huge expense, and it's a key recruitment tool for businesses to attract employees. And so we use this as a tool to get talent in the door. And if we're starting to be priced out of quality insurance products in this space, we're really going to have a problem retaining these quality employees because they're going to be looking for the best offer.
I'm looking at it right now from Kaiser Family Foundation. I know you're probably familiar with that. Yeah. Probably the best source for this kind of information. 49% of all the insured in the country receive their insurance from their employer. Mm-hmm. Medicaid's 20%. Medicare's 14%, so 35% from government. You got military, non-group, and so forth. And then we still have 8.2% uninsured, which is a big problem in Mississippi as well.
And we all hate that time of year, and it's right in between Thanksgiving and Christmas where everybody's just on edge thinking, how much is that premium going to go up?
Yeah.
And there's this is all a factor in, there's general inflation in healthcare, just like there is in every other market. But these additional add-ons through policy really do impact the bottom line. And you can point to one and say, oh, well, that's just 88 cents per member per month. Well, if you do 3 or 4 of those things each year, that really adds up.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, so we've talked about PBMs and healthcare. What else are you guys tracking?
Yeah, so we've got some exciting stuff, especially in the workforce space. We've got a tax credit for childcare. That is obviously another workforce issue where you've got folks with young kids and they need to find a quality place to put their child while they go to work. We have an existing tax credit on the book for business. We're really trying to make that more useful. It's not very utilized. The threshold is too high to access it. There's some rules and regs in there that don't make sense. So we're really cleaning that up. That's in conference right now. Really excited about that piece.
So this will be a tax credit to the employer, right?
That's right.
Okay.
But the employer has to demonstrate that essentially the employer sends that stipend to the child care facility, and the employee gets that benefit benefit of having that access.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It really is. It's a great tool that we can utilize. And right now there's a version that's capped at a certain amount for the state, so it kind of protects the state coffers. And I've made the argument, hey, put that cap in there. If we can demonstrate that we can reach that cap of that level of demand, we're going to come back, in future years and say, hey, let's look at boosting that up because this is really helping employers and employees.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. I think that's good policy. Now, something I felt we kind of missed out on, get your take on this, is, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act at the federal level, the reforms there for some of the individual tax treatment of tips and overtime, automobile interest. We didn't mirror that at the state level.
Yeah, it's funny. People talk about, and not just that issue, but I've worked on tax issues. That was my original position when I first started.
Okay.
Was really dealing with tax issues. Mississippi is one of those states that we do it our own way. We don't mirror the federal code on much of anything.
Right.
And a lot of states really do. So if there's federal changes, it just flows down to
Automatic.
the state level. That's right. We don't do it that way, and so I would love, when I first started in this world, Governor Barber had a blue ribbon tax commission. It was sort of on the tail end of his second term, so it didn't end up getting much traction in the legislature, but I would love to see policymakers sit down and really look at a comprehensive overview of our tax code, because I think mirroring some of the federal tax incentives, tax breaks, that would really benefit Mississippi. And I think that's something that we're going to push for folks to really look at.
I'm just worried that a lot of people, it's tax season, doing their tax returns, find out, well, gosh, I got that benefit on the federal return, but not on my state return.
That's right. And that's frustrating to people because I heard you earlier talking about people getting confused on federal representatives versus a state representative.
Yeah.
People don't really distinguish between federal taxes and state taxes.
That's 100%
They
right.
think they just pay taxes.
Yeah.
It's different. And if you're not careful, you could miss out on one or the other, or get frustrated that you're not treated the same at the federal and state level. So.
As you know, in the tax preparation world, they refer to that as a reconciling item between the federal and the state return. You find that a lot when it comes to depreciation on the business tax.
I was about to say, on the business side, it's almost even worse.
Yeah, it's worse.
Because there's so many various avenues at the federal level that just aren't available at the state level. And that's something that we've been asked, especially multi-state companies that get a benefit in another state. They want it here, and we don't have that opportunity.
Super complicated, to deal with all that. John, always appreciate you coming in. Enjoy the discussion.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Gerard.
John McKay, President and CEO of Mississippi Business Alliance, has been our guest. Coming right back, half an hour of Middays remains.
From the Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Welcome to our shop
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Okay, now you have a good one.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Really appreciate you tuning in today. So, this I call it 1%ism back in the Occupy Wall Street era. You remember that? They call it the 99%ism. I just turned it on its heels. Occupy Wall Street, of course, had all the crazy signs all over the place. We are the 99%. Remember that? And they thought that they were going to just hang out and do nothing for a while. and change the world, I guess, to their liking, which really amounted to, we want your money in our pocket. That's really what they were attempting to say. So,
and half of them were trust fund babies that were just upset they were going to have to wait until they were adults to get their inheritance.
So true.
But that's a wide swath of any protest you see protesting for anything, Democrat, liberal, leftist, or whatever.
That is true.
Just a bunch of affluent people who've never had a single hard day in their life trying to virtue signal that they're somehow good people.
Well, like I said, it's incumbency, baby. I'm convinced of it, that when you just grow up, like you said, you've never had to struggle, never had any stress about where you were going to sleep or where your food was coming from.
If your hardest day is, Daddy got me a BMW and I wanted a Mercedes.
That about sums it up right there. No doubt about it. But this whole idea of the 99%, I'm calling it 99%ism, but like I said, I kind of worked around it. I now call it the 1%ism. But you got these crazy people in Washington on the Democrat side, specifically Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, and Chris Van Hollen, the senator Democrat, of course, from Maryland. And they've got two tax proposals that it's kind of their own no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, that would essentially take a good number of Americans who currently pay a little bit of taxes totally off the tax rolls. In fact, the plan from Van Hollen would exempt anyone who's got an income, an individual of $46,000 and less, zero income taxes, $92,000 for a couple and down, zero income taxes. That's what they want. And Van Hollen's is not quite as generous, but it's similar in that what it attempts to do is just take a lot of people off the tax rolls. They're calling it a massive middle-class tax cut. But I'm
just waiting on a leftist to finally come out and argue that giving married couples a tax break is somehow offensive.
That's true. Well, this is a kind of a rise of what I call the 1%ism that they call the 99%ism, and it's just the belief that the top 1% or even really a smaller cadre of billionaires should finance all of government. It's something we've talked about many times, is that we got just a sliver of households in this country that are financially powering the whole dang country from a tax perspective. And that's a very dangerous situation. You know, Maggie Thatcher famously said, eventually you run out of other people's money. I think the bigger risk here is you eventually run out of the people that want to stay here with their wealth. I don't know where they go, but they may stop producing such that there's nothing to tax. Well, heck, if I'm going to be working 11 and a half months out of the year for the government, I'm out. I'm not going to do that anymore. They don't think about that. Again, the incumbency. It's easy when you've already created all of these amenities and conveniences and assets of life. But that's what these guys are wanting to do, is just throw more of the tax burden onto this small number of people and just sort of hope that works out. It's just amazing to me that voters in New York and California don't seem to get, talking about the younger folks in particular, the dangers of socialism and have this favorable opinion of it. And if you look at countries which have implemented more full-blown socialism, I'll give you a couple of examples. Romania and India, and their per capita income has dropped substantially.
Yeah, got to go that far away. Just look off the coast of Florida.
Well, that's true. At Cuba, which is about to fall. The president said, I guess I'm going to own Cuba before it's over with. Think about Venezuela and the turnaround currently occurring in that country since the socialist tyrant Maduro has been removed by the president. That country's starting to show signs of its former life, I would say. I think that would happen in Iran, honestly. There's an economic bit to that situation as well, as you know. Let's be honest. If women have to run around and make sure that their wrists are covered or face some sort of brutal punishment, you're probably not you're not optimizing your economic output. How about that? It's not possible. And so I think that would be a significant turnaround. You know, if you look at like the country of Romania and Poland, which did lean heavily into socialism, the point now is that they've gotten away from that. They've shifted away from that. And the per capita income, by the way, was lowest during the socialism era. And now it's been trending significantly, sharply upward. Guess what? Turns out people produce more, make more, serve society better when they get to be rewarded for their efforts. It's not a hard concept. It's really not. But unfortunately, there's a lot of crazy people in this country even that don't get it. Even China, you'd have to admit, has leaned more to the right from an economic perspective. They still have crazy stuff going on. They still persecute certain sects of their population. But from an economic perspective, they've actually embraced a little more capitalism. It's kind of as the CCP allows. But the point is, their per capita income has also risen as a result. So there are lots of examples of how countries have tried this and found them to fail. I feel like that's kind of the honeymoon New York's going through right now. Ultimately, will affect them directly, personally, and they'll realize the error of their ways in electing this nutcase that doesn't know what the heck he's doing except, I got to have more taxes. That's all he says. That's all they know.
I think you're giving them too much credit. To learn the error of your ways means you have to actually be self-reflective.
That is true.
And that's a near impossibility for anybody left of center.
That's sad because that's pretty critical to
because they don't think for
having
themselves.
A productive life.
They just regurgitate whatever spoon-fed talking point they've been given by the talking heads on TV or the politicians they voted for.
I guess you're right. I got to pass this on. Caught a video that passed through my social media. It was a Colorado State rep, Kenny Nguyen, refused to say "under God" while reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in the Colorado Capitol. What a peach Kenny is, the representative in Colorado. Just incredible, the kind of crazy stuff we have going on. Man, just as you think you've seen it all. Here at home, the parents' campaign still campaigning against education freedom and campaigning against a bill in the Senate that would alter the Children's Promise Act that would allow more money to be contributed by people that would be eligible for direct tax credits with the state of Mississippi and more money contributed for private school education. They absolutely hate that, don't they? They detest it. I did attend last night, report on that, an engaging debate between Leah Ferretti of Mississippi Ready. She, a Madison County mom, originally from the Delta, has raised children, and some of those dyslexic, took advantage of the dyslexic ESA so she could get her children in a school that was better suited to deal with that condition. And her debate was, the other participant in the debate, I should say, was the superintendent of the Monroe County School District. He, of course, opposes school choice, and honestly, I didn't learn anything new from him with respect to why most people, the talking points typically spouted by opponents. Except I did find a couple of things to be contradictory, and we got one segment remaining. I'll dig into that just a second. We're in the Element Well studio. Stay with us.
Trust Care is a proud sponsor.
Properly set all controls before recording.
All systems go. The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Middays from the Element Wealth Studio on the C Spire text line. Casey says, one of my favorite movies about government is Born Yesterday. That was a good one. Also, another text, I taught government for 16 years to high school students, and it was required to graduate. I also registered all 18-year-olds to vote. Good for you. Thank you for that. Northwest Rankin, that's where this individual taught. It just seems common sense to me that we should teach that in our schools. It's crazy to me we even have to mandate it with law. But I guess there's some schools that don't feel the need to instruct our young people on the basic workings of our government and government systems. Louis from the 662 says, politicians like Mondami remind me of those favorite teachers in high school. You thought they were great then when you weren't doing anything in class. However, once you got to college and struggled because you didn't learn anything in high school, they weren't your favorite anymore. Great point. Have y'all seen Encyclopedia Britannica and their subsidiary Merriam-Webster suing OpenAI for copyright infringement? I haven't seen that.
Yeah, they said that they've been training the AI on,
okay,
I want to say it was 100,000 different online articles.
Interesting. I can see that. So sad we pay all these superintendents big money and we got to have law for everything. Phonics, now civics, says John in Pontotoc. That's a good point, John. I hear you. I just alluded to that a little bit, that why do we even have to have a dang law to teach what they should want to teach and embrace and be enthusiastic about teaching, is to impart the knowledge of our government and its systems on our young people.
It's almost like the education lobby doesn't even know what's best.
Oh, too worried about fighting school choice. Unbelievable. BJ Knupp says, is it true that independent pharmacies lose money on doing those daily maintenance drugs that you mentioned, because that is what they're saying? I don't know. I know they say that some of them, I have seen that as well, BJ, contend that the reimbursement is actually lower than their landed cost. I don't know if that's the case or not. And then I start to wonder, well, why is that different from the national chains and the independents? I'm not sure. And then I wonder, well, why do you sell them if you're losing money? And if that's the case, are you making more money on the other drugs, kind of the way the model of a grocery store works? Call it loss leader pricing. Good question, though. And BJ says, I'm a proud member of the Alliance, talking about the business alliance. I want him to call fair balls and strikes because I don't want to lose our independent pharmacies and not have competition in small towns like Fulton when Walmart would be the only other game in town. For your information, Walmart and CVS own their own PBMs, which is why they have a distinct price advantage, and independent pharmacies are gone. They would control the market and the price-hurting manufacturing companies in the alliance. I hear you, BJ. I would also encourage you to consider there's also some benefits to scale as well. Now, if that scale becomes antitrust, then it's a problem. But if it's scale and it's, as I like to call, the elephant's balls, where the big guys are fighting it out, there is some potential benefit from that. I also recognize that there are lots of areas where they may not want to set up shop, and that's where the independent pharmacies come in. And I also am sensitive and recognize that there are a lot of people who are just more comfortable with their independent pharmacists. Sometimes those can be sticky, thorny, personal matters. You worked in that environment. I certainly understand and appreciate that. There's got to be something we can do that can kind of address all the concerns, and I hope that's what ultimately we get in the form of a bill. So, let's see, Gerard, has anything been reported on the Iranian soccer team that had to return to Iran because their families went missing, D.W. Madison? You know anything about that, Rhino? I hadn't heard.
Yeah, they were, I believe, in Australia competing when the war broke out, and the IRGC basically abducted their families to ensure they returned to Iran. There were a handful of them that were initially granted, I believe it was asylum by Australia, with the insistence of President Trump, because he saw something about it on social media. But I do believe all of them have eventually had to go back to Iran for fear of their families that, again, were abducted by the Iranian regime.
They're just evil people. There's just no doubt about it. And by the way, last night, Dr. Chad O'Brien, the superintendent of Monroe County School District, who opposes school choice, I think that's fairly consistent across the education community. And he was debating the director of Mississippi Ready, Leah Ferretti, at this event held by the Lee County Republican Club. Well done event. Really impressed with the work there. The panelists asked great questions, I thought. The moderator did a good job as well. But Dr. O'Brien said something that caught my attention. He said, choice isn't all it's propped up to be, because everybody really won't be able to choose to go to the school of their choice, that the schools actually hold the cards and control, be they public or private schools. There's certainly some truth to that, but I found that to be a bit in conflict with the assertion that the school choice opponents make, which is, oh my gosh, our schools are going to be overwhelmed with all these people. Well, how can you have both? How can you have a situation where, no, you can't just go to where you want, but, we're going to be overwhelmed with people who are going where they want?
It's because none of their arguments are based in actual logic. It's just emotion.
It's a shame. We'll continue the discussion on that a little bit tomorrow as well. We're going to be down at the West End. Come see us. Stay safe and God bless.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.